Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with the Gecko Frontier. Gecko has been making content covering numerous games for the past 2 years that I know of, with a heavy focus on the extraction genre, tips, tricks, news, analysis, like kind of a full spread of stuff you got going on. You seem like an excellent source of information on the extraction genre. Gecko, thanks for doing this. How's it going?
It's going all right. I appreciate the time, the generous intro you gave me, and also the honor of someone thinking enough of me to give you their name, my name.
Absolutely, dude. Yeah, then huge shout out to them. I'll definitely put their little comment here in the video because, yeah, they had left a comment. I was talking about something, with the extraction genre, and they're like, dude, you gotta check out this guy. So, yeah, definitely cool to have that pop up and then obviously find such a robust channel of information. Like, how did your channel get started?
Well, interesting enough, I actually wasn't a huge fan of the extraction genre. Kind of found it. We can get into that to the specifics of that, but how it started, I remember I got into this Cycle Frontier, got super passionate about it. And then, I kind of noticed, like, hey, the numbers don't lie. It doesn't look great for this game. What can I do to kind of help? And so my my observation was that the new player experience was just horrible. And the fact that the game was hard, just, new players would come in, they get beat down, they call it a day and they bounce. And I noticed that a lot of the content creators that were making guides for things that were kind of talking past the sale, so to speak, and they were just, talking about where to find this item, where to find that. I'm like, okay, put a pause there. Most players are coming into the game, getting their butts whooped. You should probably work on that portion. So my first video was born from that of just a fight guide, and then just kind
Gotcha.
of went from there.
Wow. Okay, that's very cool. I didn't follow the Cycle Frontier when it come out, but obviously, kind of, I think within the extraction world, that's kind of one of the sad ones that I hear people comment about very frequently. Is kind of like everyone who played it has a very fond place in their heart for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just potential as well. I think I often try to catch myself from looking at it from a nostalgic goggles point of view, and that when the shutdown was announced, I was neither surprised nor shocked. And also, in a lot of ways, I kind of just lost my flavor for the game entirely on the spot because one of the biggest reasons I kept playing the game is because of the potential that was there. And unfortunately, once the potential was gone, I was like, well, the game as it is has to be enough. And sadly, for a lot of us, it wasn't.
Gotcha. And so that was your first foray into the extraction genre.
Yes, yes. Everything else before then, um, the big ones would be Escape from Tarkov, and then there was also Hunt as well. But when the cycle came out, it was free to play, and me and both my son got into the access to beta, so we just started trying it out, and then from there, I was just like, wow, this is like, I kind of like it.
Oh, that's awesome. So you had a kind of a partner built in. You're ready to duo up right away.
Yeah, if you can afford the investment, it's 16 years in the process. You get you a duo permanently at this point.
Yeah, yeah. See, I'm right now. I'm hoping at that point. My son's only 6, so when I play with him, I'm carrying him. But I'm sure by then he'll be carrying me around.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, my son, I saw a video of him 8 years old doing trick shots on Overwatch. So
So hell yeah,
believe me, you're not far off.
that's awesome. Is there something that kind of, I guess, after obviously so you make the video about the cycles, or something that kept you in the extraction genre? Because obviously your videos today still have a pretty heavy lean towards that. Is it like
Oh,
kind of
for sure.
enjoyed it or?
For sure. I think it was interesting because I didn't like it. The idea, at the very least, I'm the typical, gamer who's gainfully employed, but I have a wallet and I have occasional time, maybe an average of an hour or more or so, play games. So the idea of playing a game that I could end up feasibly in the negative after I'm done playing the game for the night is not exactly an appealing prospect for most gamers. So it's not a surprise. It's still kind of a niche genre, but I was shockingly surprised by how much I enjoyed it precisely because of the high tension and high risk, because it wasn't this Twitch type experience where I would go into a match, have like 20, 30 plus kills, and just be completely forgetting the match, within 5 minutes, if not by the next day. Whereas years later, I still have runs and matches in cycle I still remember vividly. And so I was intrigued by that, and so I just studied it more and more and more, like, what game, what are the common denominators in the game design of the successful ones, and what are the common ones and the ones that don't? aren't successful. And so that kind of intrigued me in terms of the game design aspect. And so I just started making videos just to kind of stay active and just muse a little bit and just, hey, these are the games that are coming out, and here are the specific things that kind of make them stand out.
Yeah. Was there a pretty like strong community around the game when you first started your channel, or was it pretty
Uh,
niche, or was it like?
by the time I started my channel, the game was already kind of in decline, so it was really kind of a limiting prospect on that.
Mhm.
My channel grew the most when season 3 launched, which is when the game kind of had its like, I think, not really death spiral, but like death grasp, in the sense that they were
Gotcha.
really trying to push it. Now it's kind of the end, the beginning of the end, so to speak. But most people just didn't know it yet. And so I grew mostly from then. It wasn't very huge. I think on average, the game sustained about 2K players for the better part of a year. And then during season 3, the highest I got, I think it was maybe around 10K, something like that, but it wasn't enough,
Yeah.
though the size of it was not very large, but we got a lot of variety though.
In the content that the developers gave you, or like in the community?
In the community, because you're getting people at the time, it was just basically just Tarkov and Hunt Showdown. And so people were looking for an alternative, especially since it was free, kinda gravitated towards the cycle. And you got a large variety of people from, people who enjoyed, you know, games like Apex or any other kind of battle royale to actual Tarkov hardcores and kinda coming in there. You saw that in the feedback, there would be, like, almost like polar opposites of the feedback. They wanted to yank the game in multiple directions.
Interesting. I kind of just as like a more recent note, last year I'd played a little bit of Level Zero Extraction, and from
Mhm.
my kind of interaction with that community and seeing how that's kind of, which obviously kind of unfortunate how it ended up going, but kind of a similar kind of thing is what I saw in terms of the community pushing and pulling in different ways as terms of what they want. And obviously, it's kind of pseudo side focus on this asymmetrical horror aspect, which was an
Mhm.
interesting choice as well. Um,
Yeah, they have a similar lifeline in the sense that the Cycle Frontier was a BR prior to being an Extraction. So it too had a previous version that they had to pivot into the version that was then itself. And we can get into the parallels between those 2 games and how I basically saw what was gonna happen before it happened, just significantly faster.
Gotcha. Yeah, because what I guess Level Zero really isn't going to make it a full year, or maybe they're going to keep
No,
supporting it for a little bit, but I don't know.
nah, I highly doubt it. It's just one of those things where it's already a niche genre, and then they've further try to alienate that niche even more. And I think one of their particular sins in this case that created the situation that they could no longer go forward is that when the original game changed, it retained a lot of the audience. And so those audience members were already bought into the original concept. So they were just giving feedback to essentially keep it as close to that concept as possible.
Okay.
And that audience kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but their feedback still held weight. At a certain point, as a dev, he goes, "You know what? If I want to appeal to more people, I actually can't be listening to people who are already fully drinking the Kool-Aid at this point."
Yeah. And that is,
So,
yeah, that's a very good point, especially with communities having so much access to developers, discords that like developers are active in and community managers. That's a very good point.
for sure, I remember, putting out a video, reaching out to developers, putting on suggestions on Discord, and I pointed out multiple times I'm part of a community that really just dives into lots of higher risk tactical, extraction type games. And I'm like, I couldn't get a single one of these guys to buy in when it was free. And like, and then you're asking people to pay money for that. These are the exact people that you wouldn't want to be attracting, the kind of people who would stick around for your game. And if they're saying, "Hey, I'm out," you got a problem.
Yeah. Was there something specific about the cycle, either in the gameplay or how it was ran, that you think kind of made it special, or do you think that that was just your entry point into the genre as a whole?
I mean, it could be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B in this regard, but I think because it was sci-fi, I think it had a clean slate to operate the way it wanted to. Because oftentimes you have games that are kind of bailed on um, modern military concepts, and so you're kind of weighed down by the reality of the situation. There's only so
Yeah.
much you can do with it, right? And so sci-fi allows you to kind of be a little bit more creative. So you really only have to start asking yourself like maybe 2, 3 questions like, "Hey, is it balanced? Is it fun? And does it make sense within the context of our universe?" That's a really small list. If you can say yes consistently to those 3, you're probably gonna have a good game.
Yeah. Well, especially like you're saying, with what else is available on the market at this time. Even still, it's kind of almost like a similar situation in a lot of ways, because I feel like the three big players are still Tarkov, Hunt, and then DMZ basically at this point. Which obviously Hunt has a very unique flavor of its own, but Tarkov and DMZ are much more on the milsim side, with Tarkov being kind of the most extreme version of that. But almost a little bit like what you're saying with Level Zero, it's like all of these games do have like a niche on top of the fact that they're trying to sell somebody on this, extraction experience, which is not the common multiplayer experience that most people are having.
For sure. I think also to note DMZ, they announced it quite some time ago that they were going to see support with that game. So I think the only reason that game is still running is because the fact that Activision is still so huge that they can afford to keep it running for right now, but it's going to remain unsupported from here on out. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they're going to make a new version of it and try to re-tackle the situation, but they are kind of a hallmark of of why there's so few options outside of the ones that are currently established, is because a lot of times developers go in and they don't truly understand, at least in my opinion, what makes the genre tick, and so they just miss the beats that they're supposed to hit. But you're right in that we have a ton of kind of like same clone type games. You have your you have your Escape from Tarkov, you have your Gray Zone Warfare, you have Arena Breakout Infinite, and recently you've had Delta Force, who has its extraction mode in it. And now it looks a lot like Call of Duty, but don't let that deceive you. The gameplay is very much like a milsim. You will die very quickly.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had a very limited time. I maybe played like 4 or 5 matches of
Mm.
the Delta Force extraction mode, and yeah, you're right. There's this little bit of disconnect because the menus and the structuring is almost 1-to-1 for Tarkov, but they do have like these hit marker kind of things that are a little Call of Duty like, and then also there's this hero aspect of it. But you're right, the time to kill is like super low, which almost feels out of place. I haven't played Delta Force. I know there's like a Battlefield type mode,
Mhm.
but I haven't touched that.
By the way,
Is that
that
good? Okay.
is quite excellent, quite well done. It's just the extraction mode, because of all these counter signals, so to speak. It feels very disjointed, is the word I'd probably use.
Gotcha. And you're saying obviously you kind of could see the decline coming for Level Zero. Was there a specific moment or thing that was occurring within um, the Cycle Frontier that you think, okay, this is the moment where they're not going to come back from this, or were you kind of like, you saw this downward trend? Was there something specific that you think led to that, or was it just the dynamic
I
of being in
mean,
this newer genre?
I mean, right. So like, there's a couple of things. There's two big aspects to this, as to what can be the killing blow, so to speak, to the Cycle Frontier, and it depends on who you ask which one had the biggest influence, right? For the starters, there's hackers, right? When the game first launched, it did the typical marketing routine, which is what typical is that these days is you're just going to have giant streamers play your game for like a week or so, right? Which is par for the course. You're going to see that more and more because it's more effective than anything else you have traditionally have done. And so everyone and their mother had eyes from like Shroud, Summit, all these big people playing this game, and they got to see how rife with hackers it was. Opening week, right? And despite all this, it still managed to get like 40K players in the opening week, but it dropped like a rock immediately after that. So that was the first one, I think, because first impressions are huge, and a lot of times players will like look at a game, maybe not even download it. They'll see their favorite streamer or content creator make something about it, and then for whatever reason, you know, in this case, hackers, they'll just write it off and they'll never look at it again. Like there's really, even though season two they did a great job of like eliminating it for the most part, that didn't matter anymore. Like everyone kind of wrote it off already at this point. So that was the first big hit, right? Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and say that this um removed the devs' responsibility in their part in this, because they sure enough shot themselves in the foot 8 times with a 6-shot revolver. They just at any point in time they can mess up, they did, right?
Okay.
And the my theory on this one, right? And I've kind of alluded this in one of my videos, is that they were devs making a game that they were ill suited for, right? Because you can imagine, let's say you have a game type that you really like, and you have your buddies that you all play this game, you're really passionate about these games, and then turn around and goes, hey, your job now is to make a game that's almost the opposite of what you would be playing, right?
Okay.
How good of a game do you think you can make, really? Right? And so their world building and storytelling historically in some of the games you've seen is very good, right? Even in the cycle, you can tell there's a lot of care that was done in creating this environment, this world, this lore. But like the game itself, at the time, if at the time they would have started developing the game for the BR version, the big thing in the space was, hey, we need to have more battle royale. So if you're looking around for funding, chances are the people who are giving funding, hey, we want a somewhat guaranteed return on investment. You need to make it a BR because that's the big thing right now. Okay, cool. They made it a BR. They gave it their own flavor. It looks pretty unique. If you look up old videos of it, it's kind of interesting in how different it looks. But I think they were a little late for the party on that one, so they didn't really do much. 3 seasons of that game not being successful, and then it goes into the extraction. They pivot to the extraction mode, and so they start making decisions about this game that kind of tell you, you know what, you probably don't like playing this game or this mode. So here's a great example. So there's a term in the extraction game called ratting. So it's basically when you like hide in a corner and you're just like really like in a dark spot and someone walks by and you ambush them, boom, they have no recourse, no nothing, bam, dead. Right. In a game where you lose stuff, that can be awfully frustrating. Right. It is at the time, right? And pretty much you can expect that to be the case no matter what. But everyone pretty much they hated how that happened. It's inevitability in these kind of games. And some games will come up with tools that how to get around this. The Cycle Frontier had no such tools. So that's people, rightfully said this is the one thing they hate to have happen to them. Now, that in mind, there's an interview that sticks out in my mind of one of the developers on stream saying, "Oh yeah, one of their favorite things to do is like hide in the bush and they'll catch people and shoot people." We're like, "What?" We're all thinking, rolling our eyes, going like, "Really? These are the guys making decisions in our game, right?"
Yep.
And then now imagine, if you will, how long it takes to make a map in a game, right? Obviously, a lot of time, a lot of resources already in a game that's kind of on shaky ground, thin ice when it comes to their funding and their viability as a game. So it takes a lot of months, a lot of time, a lot of money to develop a map, especially in this kind of genre where the maps get pretty big, a lot of moving parts, PvE, loot, all that fun stuff, right? Their brand new map that they launch in season 2, right? Bear in mind, we talked about ratting and how awful that is, right? Is essentially a alien underground ant farm that is illuminated as such.
Oh no.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Anyone in their community that was a fly on the wall or whatever, when they were coming up with this idea, could have told them no. They could have told them, anyone who plays this kind of genre could be like, this is a really bad idea. Right. And so you have things like that. And also, for example, their matchmaker system was based off of loot value. So when you go in, you gather loot, there's a certain value attached to this loot. And so when you exited, your MMR was based off the value of that loot. It had no bearing on how good you were in a gunfight, had no bearing how much people, like your KD ratio, had no bearing on any of that. Right? It's the community beat the drum to death to change that, right? They said, oh, we want to encourage different kind of play styles. Let's be real. Like, it's the kind of person sneaking around that barely gets out with a high amount of loot versus in the same lobby as people who can hunt down and kill the entire lobby. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? And so you ended up with this like juxtaposition where like you go in, if you were like a regular player, you'd be in line, you'd be with a regular Timmy who just like managed to get a good haul a couple times. Now he's in your lobby and you're just wailing on him. It's like, that's not a good experience, right? And it was interesting. Over and over and over again, people kept asking for it. Only maybe towards the end of its life cycle did they finally change it as, quote, an experiment to see what it was. Overnight, you saw improvements in lobbies. Overnight.
So wait,
Right?
was the MMR, was that like a public ranking system? Like, oh, you're going up to diamond, or was it like a back end thing just used to matchmake players?
Right. It was just a back end thing for
Okay.
players. Like,
Wow, so that's
like,
horribly it's not like you're playing a competitive mode where it's like, let me get the max loot to level up and achieve some rank. It's just they were silently putting you and kind of mismatching players against each other. That
for
sounds
sure. And
horribly
it was highly
frustrating.
abusable too. Highly abusable too, because you can go in and like start wiping the lobby and pick up nothing.
Yeah.
And then exit out, and then your MMR wouldn't improve. In fact, it would get lower.
Jeez.
Right. And so it was these decisions like this that were like over and over and over again that kind of told me, I'm like, these devs don't actually play their own game. I don't mean, and most of the time when I say that figuratively. This case, I meant literally.
Wow. Is
So it was that kind of decision making plus the hackers. And because here's the thing, if the devs turned around and started making every decision right, the killing blow was already made. You were going to bleed out. There's no amount of players at that point that you could play around with because, oh, we improved the MMR system, but you have no players to play with anymore.
is there like obviously you look at something like that where it seems almost like they're very disconnected from the experience they're making. When you look at these kind of upcoming games like Arc Raiders and Exoborn and things we've seen a little bit more about. Obviously, we've heard about
Hmm.
kind of the PUBG, I think extraction thing that might be maybe Fortnite's doing something like that. There's one other one that I think just started to get Far Cry, right? Um, when you look at these, do you think that the lessons from these kind of earlier extraction games are going to carry over, or does it seem like that's still being disregarded and developers don't understand the genre? Or do you feel like this is kind of coming more into the mainstream and they are kind of building more thorough understanding of the genre when they're developing these games?
I think it really depends on what they're paying attention to, right? The individual studios themselves, because the last year and a half, we got a lot of what I call posers, right? Like you got games that were effectively either battle royales or your standard run of the mill PvP shooter games. They just slapped on an extraction mechanic, right? Like there was no like looting, there was no tension, no nothing. It was just basically different genres. They slapped on an extraction mechanic, which showed that they didn't understand what it needed to actually be successful, right? You look at big names like, DMZ Hazard Zone made by, the Call of Duty and
Mm.
Battlefield franchises that had zero risk to their game, zero, right? So it showed, that even with a mountain of money and a built-in player base, that wasn't enough, right? So you have to hit the beats when you need to hit the beats, right? Now, with the recent stuff, being privy to the betas and the closed alphas, things like that, I'm seeing a direct change in that, and that is that people are understanding that's required. That's not an optional thing, right? You cannot, and I understand why bigger companies will went the direction they did because it's antithetical to what they normally do. Like you want that quick dopamine, repeat hamster wheel feel, whereas the track shooter, that's not at all it's almost the opposite feeling, right? You're
Yeah.
appealing to the dopamine, the rush of power, whereas in extraction, you're appealing to their, the thrill of the fear.
Yeah.
It's those are very different feelings. And so seeing the new stuff come out, I'm seeing that finally they're starting to get things right. So we might actually have actual competition now as opposed to like people dying because they trip over themselves essentially.
Yeah. Do you kind of see this as extraction games are moving into their kind of peak era, like where we're going to get AAA developers making very popular, kind of mainstream iterations that are going to be played by a much wider audience? Or do you think it's going to maintain a kind of niche following of people who are looking for this, a little bit more intense, different kind of experience?
I think me personally, I think there's always going to be a limit on how popular this genre can be because, like I said before, it's like you're asking someone who has limited of time on their hands to play a game in which there's possibility or likelihood that they'll end up negative in progress by the time they're done playing for that night. It's a hard sell. Like that's just you have to be kind of self aware, and that's a hard sell, right? But to me, it's like for anyone, and I imagine you have people who are really enthusiastic about the marathon IP, but maybe not so much so the extraction genre.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
I would offer this piece of advice is like I used to tell my son when he didn't want to eat something, try it, you'll like it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I did not know how great it would be until I played it because I'm older now. I'm not these young guys with twitch reflexes or anything like that, right? So if you got a situation where you can kind of plan, where you can like use patience as a weapon, where you can move a little slower, you can dictate where you want to fight, when you want to fight, how you want to fight, right? It's not about how many kills, it's more about getting the kills that matter and then also getting out, right? So these types of things they reward maybe a little bit more of a mature outlook on, itself. And that's one thing I enjoyed about the cycle is like it wasn't how many fights I got into, it was the ones that were important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly what you're saying is something I've been trying to, articulate slowly through videos, try to like, because I was coming from like I had played Hunt very briefly. I'd played a little bit of DMZ before the past year when I started trying to
Mhm.
get more into and play, take a much broader approach to the experiences I was getting involved with. But definitely that kind of selling point there of like, oh man, I just want to relax. I want to have a good time. But I do think that it offers it's like very layered in ways that are hard to recreate if you don't have that risk of losing your items. Like just the experience of the prep going into the match, what you're doing in game, and how you're choosing to accomplish tasks. Like you're saying, there are a lot of different approaches that you can take, and they reward you in different ways. Is there something about that risk reward dynamic that you think works better in certain games, or have you seen like something where it's like, okay, yeah, this game is not going to succeed just based off the mechanics and the way that they have it set up in terms of making it this really difficult
Oh,
to
for
get
sure.
into experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a misnomer when people say it's a hardcore shooter, right? It's like, and they associate that with like realism, like a fast time to kill. I don't think that applies in this genre,
Yeah.
right? I think what consists as hardcore is that how hard it is to replicate the gear you just lost,
Yeah.
right? And so I think Hunt is the most casual you can ever get on this genre with before you lose the risk appeal. Like in that game, it's very easy to replace loadouts, very easy to stay in the game. It's very easy to not feel like you're going broke. And so like I feel like that's kind of like the lowest you can possibly get. Whereas on the other end, you have Escape from Tarkov, where the people have commented that it takes literally like weeks or months to acquire a certain amount of gear, and you can lose that in a heartbeat,
Yeah.
right? And so like, that's the polar opposite. The real question: how much in the middle is there left for who wants to take it? Right? And so or who has the will to take it in terms of, like, the vision. So, the real question at that point is, what does that middle look like? And so, is there a room enough for multiple? Is there not? Right? In terms of, like, the competition or different niches and, so, there are other niches if you wanted to explore that genre more, the, like, more medieval fantasy. It's like, Dragonborn, I think it was, or Dungeonborn?
Oh yeah, I think it's
Pretty sure I'm getting there, yeah.
I played Dark and Darker, and I think I tried
Right.
Dungeon Board, but they're so close in my mind that I draw a
Yes,
blank.
they're practically the same thing, honestly, right? But, like, if someone was more fantasy oriented, they wanted to have that kind of experience and extraction oriented, I think they're still a little bit hardcore in that regard, but I think, if you wanted to broaden your horizons in that space, Dragonborn is, or Dungeonborn, excuse me, is, free, so might as well try it out.
Yeah.
And so it just depends on in terms of how popular it can get. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I think there is a popularity that's there. There was a recent meeting from Embark Studios, the makers of Arc Raiders, where they discussed it was a shareholder meeting. They discussed a trend that they noticed that gamers wanted more impact in their decision making. Right, what that generally results in. You look games that like roguelites, soul lights, extraction shooters. These are things where like there's a little bit more punishment to making the wrong decision. Permadeath and like RPGs for like characters, things like that. Like so, it's a trend that players gravitate to. How much of that is yet to be seen.
Yeah. Do you think, because I feel like one of the other big challenges that this genre faces, because while there are PvE exclusive, like, the Forever Winter
Mhm.
experiences, I do feel like the genre is pretty heavily tied, at least in the iterations we've seen so far, to this kind of PvE, where like you're battling the world and
Mhm.
enemy AI and then also other players. And obviously with that comes the whole live service model that has been pretty popularized over the past decade, I
Mhm.
guess, at least, of gaming. Is there Has there been like any specific extraction shooter that you think has approached the, hey, we have to provide seasonal content or battle passes? Is there one of those kind of realms that you think works better in this genre? Or because obviously we've seen stuff like not work out, but is there any one that you think is a live service model that's suited to the genre, or wipes, or
I think I think, both types in terms of, like, a boxed product, you pay for it to play it, or free-to-play models, they have their both strengths and weaknesses. I think, I'm fine with a free-play live service. I know a lot of people, especially around my age group, they're like, they don't particularly care for it. I think
yeah,
when it's done well, is a good, feedback loop for developer, like a communication method for developers and players. Like, if they don't like it, they're not gonna pay for it. But they'll continue playing it, so you know you got something on your hand. I think the bigger factor as well, people on people's minds, especially after the cycle, is hackers. So like having a price tag almost helps a lot in that regard.
Yeah.
And so it's not, it's not a safeguard completely, but it's certainly a lot better than having a free to play game where people will just make new counts and keep going anyways. Um, and so I don't know, it's one of those things where and in terms of monetizing, they're gonna run into the same pitfalls other games are doing. I think as the genre evolves, I think it will play catch up with the rest of the gaming landscape. Like you look at the success of Marvel, that was a great example of a monetization. You look at the battle passes that they have. Have you played it all? Are you familiar with all?
I played a handful of rounds of Marvel Rivals. I'm not super into I played Overwatch when it first came out, and
Mm.
maybe like before that TF2, if you consider Team Fortress 2, I guess the earliest maybe iteration of that. But so that was my only experience, but I haven't gotten too hard into any of the other was.
And they have incredibly generous monetization methods. Their battle pass is not a FOMO battle pass. So like if you ever bought a battle pass and you're like, man, life happens and I can't finish the battle pass, that doesn't exist there. And so like you can actually finish it beyond the time limit in which you're allowed. You can always go back and complete a previous battle pass that you've purchased.
Yeah,
So I think that's
that's awesome. I heard Helldiver
well,
does that as well, right?
mhm. Right, great
Yeah.
example. I mean, it's one of those things where I think as players and as players give positive feedback to this kind of stuff and negative feedback to other things, the genre will learn to correct itself. Now, in terms of speaking of negative things, then there's this issue with ABI or Arena Breakout Infinite. Are you familiar?
Mm-mm, I'm not.
Okay, so Arena Breakout Infinite is essentially a Tarkov clone. It's very similar. If you feel like it's free, right? So again, another opportunity for you to try an extraction shooter that's free. However, it is a mil sim game. So if you're not comfortable with that kind of realism and that kind of quick snap, low time to kill,
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna leave a good taste in your mouth when it comes to extraction shooter, to be honest. But it came out and its monetization was a bit, let's say, um not well received. Let's just say that, right? So a couple of things to think about, especially if you're not familiar with the extraction shooter genre. There are a couple of terms that can be helpful. So there's a stash. So basically, whenever you go into the world, you make it back, everything you bring back, you kind of put it in your stash. These are things that you're not risking. These are things that are back at your base. And so again, your stash, right? And there's typically a stash size. So there's a limit how much you can fit in there. And each game has its own way of how to measure what's big and what takes up space and all that kind of good jazz, right? Next, there's a safe pocket. Typically, most extraction shooters have what's called a safe pocket. And so this is like a tiny little thing that you have where you can put things in at safe, no matter what. Even if you die, you will go back to your base with said items. Typically, they're very small in some kind of limiting factor. So it's not to be, essentially take away the risk, but it's like, hey, you found this one thing that's super rare and you managed to be able to fit it in there, but there's nothing else you can save. So, you know, that's a safe pocket. And then there's this, in-game currency that you typically can use to, buy your guns, load out your character, all that kind of fun stuff, right? Um, so what ABI did, right, is it's monetized the size of your safe pocket, it monetized the size of your stash, and it gave you the ability to buy in-game currency directly,
Okay.
right? Now it got a lot of flack, right? Rightfully so. No, I'm not gonna sit there and defend it, but it got a lot of flack, rightfully so. But from where the direction it got flack from, I was disappointed in because you have games like Escape from Tarkov and Gray Zone Warfare. It is typically a standard practice to buy a quote better version of the game to start off with a bigger stash size, a bigger safe pocket, and a bigger amount of starting gear. That's standard practice, right? Whether it should be, that's debatable, but that is in fact standard practice, right? In terms of monetization methods, a lot of people were giving ABI flack for doing the exact same thing, just in a different way. In Escape from Tarkov and Gray Zone Warfare, you paid significantly more than the starting price to have this, but you were done with it. You had it, period. You bought it, right? ABI would rent these things. Now, again, you're going to throw up in your mouth a little bit when you hear that. However, I would put forth the idea that the amount of time you spend playing a game is on average about 6 months or so. That's the industry standard. And so if you think about how much money a person would have to spend on Escape from Tarkov or Great Zone Warfare, and the average amount of time you played spending the game, you actually spend less playing ABI than you do these other games,
Yeah.
right? So it's not the money, it's the way they did it that kind of feels it slimy, right? And then there was people defending the fact that you can just straight up buy currency, right? Because it's, oh, it's not pay to win, right? And their definition that they were going with was, well, you can still win gunfights. The fact that I can still win a gunfight against a person who has significantly better gear than me makes it so that it's not pay to win, because you can't actually pay for anything that I can't already get in game. And I think they're missing the forest for the trees when they make this argument, because you have to define what winning looks like, right? In a straight up PvP game, like where it's like your kills versus deaths and all that stuff, yeah, winning the gunfight is winning the game. But in this genre, winning is not just winning the gunfight. It's also getting out and acquiring wealth.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can straight up do that with a credit card, that is pay to win.
Yeah.
Right. And so you got to see a very real example of how it wasn't okay to do. You saw all the other games that were about to come out, Delta Force, Level Zero Extraction. They had their opportunity to kick the Hornet, or kick them while they were down a little bit. They made, social media posts like, hey, this is not, we're never going to do this, yada yada, blah blah blah. Level Zero Extraction, kind of a moot point, but whatever. But you can clearly see people were paying attention. It made a big splash, and not necessarily in a good way, you know. And whereas I feel like Marvel Rivals is making a big splash in a good way. And so I think
Yeah.
hopefully people who are paying attention, hey, you don't have to be greedy. People will straight up throw money at you if you give them a good game and you look like you're being generous about it.
Gotcha. So you think as long as they're kind of tapped in and listening to the kind of feedback that these other games have gotten, that the data is there, basically. They just need to kind of open up their eyes and ears and listen to walk down the right path in terms of what people are looking for in the genre.
For sure. And I think there's ways you can do that in terms of like, they maybe are traditionally not necessarily the most comfortable ways of doing it. Like my example, what I would give is that people would look at stash size and safe pocket size being able to be purchasable larger. You say, well, that's pay to win. I'm not really comfortable with that. Well, let's put this in another frame. I could say it's a brand new player. They get their daily logins, which is a typical industry practice to get people to kind of start playing the game early on. And then at that point, they're offered, hey, if you want, you spend $5. Here's a skin. Here's a slightly bigger stash. Here's a slightly bigger safe pocket. And none of it is bigger than what you can earn in game, right? I don't see the problem with that.
Yeah.
Like if you eventually work your way to that point anyways, but you're allowing the new player to get it right away to ease their otherwise rocky start in a genre that's not necessarily new person friendly. I see the benefits outweighing the negatives there.
Yeah. Yeah, because you bring another person into the fold, which is going to make the lobbies better. It's going to make the matches more engaging. Yeah.
For sure, right? And so it's one of those things where it's like, and that's not directly impeding, that's space. Well, are they good enough to fill that space? That's another question.
Hmm. Do you think, like, with
But I'm
Tarkov?
sorry, actually,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, you did mention the fact that there's the PvE aspect of it, and I think we should definitely not skip over that, because it's always there. Like it's every game I've ever seen, every forum, every Discord. When it comes to these games, there's always someone going, "Man, if it was only PvE only, man, if it was only like a PvE only version." And it happens in every single game, and
And,
I think that deserves some honest, examination.
well, do you think that games like the Forever Winter might be more popular as like an alternative to this, kind of like their own flavor or something? Or do you think that that's something that companies aren't going to focus on? Because it almost seems like every game that's been, despite what you're saying, which 100% is true, and I've even seen people make those comments on like my videos about Marathon, like, well, I just wish it was at least single player, which I understand
You'll have
people.
one in this video too, I promise.
But do you think that that's something that they're really looking at? Because it seems like every game extraction game that's getting announced is PvE, right? Like I don't know. Do you think that that's something that they're gonna attack more directly and try to like develop games specifically like that, or maybe I just have blinders on to smaller projects?
No, no, no. Let's dissect that. So like, um, PvE has always been a hot topic issue, right? And so like, The problem is that you cannot replicate the tension other players give you, right? And that's the key factor of the extraction genre, the tension, right? It's not the flair or the action, it's the tension, right? So even if there's a such thing as too many players in the lobby, so if you're guaranteed gunfights, the tension's gone too because you know for certain you're going to go into a gunfight.
No.
All right, so you need to know maybe, and that's really the maybe that's hanging over your head, right? No amount of PvE can replace that. Like, that's just bull-faced truth, right? And if you lean into it harder, right, you actually may get different problems. So, for example, you have two games that lean into the PvE aspect the most in this genre, right? You have Heartland, which never got made. It's the Division Heartland. It was a beta, and they got canceled. Now, my personal thing, I think they're going to include it as a mode in the next Division title. That's just my instincts in the situation because it felt way more developed than a title that rightfully needed to get canceled. But they had this thing where it was a day-night cycle. So you'd go in during the day, you can extract pretty much anywhere and anytime you wanted to. It was just strictly PvE. However, once nighttime rolled around, the extractions became way more limited, and now players can fight each other. And and the problem with this is that and this is a common thing you're going to hear all the time. So anyone who's listening to this right now is saying, well, you can just turn off player damage. You can just, it'll be the same game. I'll play it anyways. Okay, well, there are some real hurdles you have to overcome before that happens. And so the first hurdle that I've just illustrated is that you can just go to PvE, farm like crazy, get your stash full of great gear, and then just go PvP and play deathmatch, right? Just, not only have you ruined the experience for yourself, you're ruining it for everybody else, right? So you need to overcome that hurdle, right? That's first, right? And then you have the type of PvE that you engage with, and no one wants a watered down experience, right? Like if you look at really great PvE games, you're looking at Helldivers, you're looking at Darktide, like these are robust PvE games experiences that are built for the experience, right? If all you're getting is essentially an empty lobby that happens to have some drones in it, that's not a good experience for you either. So it's like, are you going to pay for that? At the end of the day, it's like, okay. So the first solution you can give for that kind of situation is like, well, just have different servers for people who want PvE and different servers for people who want PvP. Grayzone Warfare did this. However, the first thing that they did not do, they did not separate the two, right? In terms of your progress and your gearing.
Okay.
So it came with the same problem as Heartland did. So you just go in PvE, play the missions out, get farmed up on gear, and then go PvP servers and just go again, be a death hobo, and just like you go and try to kill as many people as you possibly can, right? So the first thing you gotta do, you have to separate the two. You have to. There's no everything except for like maybe monetized cosmetics or something like that. I mean, absolutely everything needs to be separated. Period. Full stop. Because otherwise you have this gear inflation that occurs, which is a natural tendency for attracting names anyways. And so you have that. You need to overcome that first. And from a business perspective, I'm not sure what the monetization ratio is in terms of running servers is, right? But it's like, if gaining the amount of players you would possibly get from a PvE version of a game, right, it warrants the expenses on having those extra servers, right? Because now it really might be, because there's really good data to suggest that PvE games do really well, right? Like if you look at the market, it is saturated with PvE games that are doing well. That's also the bad news. It's saturated with PvE games that are doing well.
Yeah.
So it's one of those cases, do you put more money and more time and more effort? Again, we've talked about, sometimes studios don't have that to spare, into a genre to appeal to players who have plenty of options on their own, right? Or a genre that has next to no competition. I mean, just common sense tells you it's probably not the wisest thing to do. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but I think there are serious hurdles to contend with.
Yeah. Do you think?
Right? And so,
sorry, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and so the PvE aspect of it is that, can it be done? Yes. Me personally, I think what you could do is like just spitballing is like, you have a PvP version of the game, you have your standard version of the game, right? And then you have like DLC that I imagine people who want to play the game enough to do PvE, they're willing to pay for it. And at that point, you can kind of make isolated scenarios and to kind of like make raids, so to speak, that where you and your buddies can just do PvE version of, kind of test the concept. So you can actually put a minimal amount of effort into it, try it out, see who buys into it, and you can use that as proof positive to say, okay, this is worth the investment. And at that point, you can kind of grow that because honestly, a company that can do it, can do both, I think they'll do well. But even still, talking about PvE, PvE doesn't just matter to PvE players. PvE matters to PvP players because
Yeah.
in extraction shooters, PvE is there to facilitate PvP, right? It's there to be essentially be a distraction. It's there to be an alert to other players to do that. And I think one of the best PvEs in the extraction shooter space is Hunt Showdown. Like bar none, you need it. Any developer needs to study that and emulate that because you have such a wide variety of enemies that aren't just meat sponges. They have different types of attacks,
Yeah.
different weaknesses, different strengths that your loadout needs to consider them before you even go on the drop. Right, the Cycle Frontier was very awful at this. It basically took the same 5 starting enemies you started with and just basically made them meat sponges at the end. It's like, just bring more ammo or bring bigger gun. That's really the only interaction you had to increase on.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hunt does do a great job of creating kind of these separate little puzzles that you have to deal with as you're moving through the world. And not just like what you're saying, they're not just bullet sponges or hyper difficult or anything, but like you said, there's a different approach depending upon what you're coming across. That does feel satisfying. Like, okay, I'm going to deal with this thing. On the flip side of that, I feel like things like DMZ in its current state have there's like 1,000 enemies on the map, which might just be I'm not super experienced in it, but it seems like there's
Mhm.
a huge amount of and then Tarkov even sometimes depending on kind of where they're at and balancing things. I feel like I'll run into like insane groups of NPCs, and it's just. Do you think? Do you think that generally the kind of PvE elements within the extraction genre should fall more in line with kind of like this is a tactical consideration? Like, do you want to engage and engaging with them is like it's about game knowledge thing, and they're not as much of a kind of gunfight threat? Or do you think they should be a little bit more hardcore, like an enemy that you're dealing with? Obviously, not on the same level as a PvP experience, but um, kind of a much more legitimate threat than maybe what would exist in like, you're playing a single player game or a PvE game exclusively, where it's like, all right, this is the enemy, you're gonna kind of mow through them.
Mhm.
Do you have
I
like a
think
preference or?
well, my preference, I think, would be, um, everyone's preference in terms of you want a PvE that and this is stated over and over again in every form I've ever seen for any kind of game. They just not in so many words. Is that you want PvE that's engaging, right?
Mhm.
And so what does that really mean though? Right? Like at the end of the day, it's a pretty nebulous, right? And what I've distilled into is that you want PvE that when you are prepared and you respect and you're properly equipped for, you could run through them pretty easily. But the moment any of those factors change, they will absolutely wreck your day.
No.
Right? And so it's one of those things where you cannot haphazardly go through them. But if you're sufficiently skilled, and you're like, and you know what you're doing, and you kind of give them the respect that they deserve, I think it becomes more engaging because a lot of times because you're dealing with the possible third party of another player, and so like if the PVE is so threatening that if another player getting involved is basically you auto death, that's too much,
No.
right? And you look at a great example, Gray Zone Warfare. They went out of their way to say, we want to emphasize the PvE in the PvEVP, right? But
Mhm.
what did that turn into? That turned into bullet sponges and auto locking, automatic weapons, right? It's like that's when you go too hard in that way in that space, it becomes frustrating because it doesn't feel fair, right? It feel especially in a genre where you lose things when you die.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the extra added factors, like, you want it to be strong, but how strong really, right?
Yeah.
You want it to be skill-based. You want it to be a great example that the cycle did at the very least was the the characters, the Marauders, affectionately called Jeff, by the community, he had a set attack pattern almost like a boss where, like, you can, like, dodge certain attacks, you have certain weak points that you have to look for, like, it wasn't necessarily difficult to kill, right? He would absolutely rip you apart if you didn't know what you were doing, though, right?
Mm.
And so in another game, again, another game that I cannot talk about that I've played, um, I think rocks a really fine balance. I think they did a great job in having a variety of enemies, different attack patterns, different weaknesses, um, and it was very refreshing because it literally nailed the definition that I had is that it's easy when you're prepared and you respect it. When you don't, you will mop the floor with you.
Gotcha. So almost, I guess, kind of tying into what you were just saying, it seems like the games are evolving. If you were betting on it, right, and it's just saying, hey, this time next year, so it's March 7th, 2026. Do you see do you think that there's an extraction game that's like constantly at the top of Twitch that isn't Tarkov or Hunt? Do you think that there is a game kind of lingering on the kind of between all of these kind of upcoming things? Do you think that there's something that's going to kind of go far and away in terms of what we've seen the genre do so far, or
Well,
no?
I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that, but it's just
You're holding out on us.
if you if you if you look the last year and a half, you could probably say no because you can see consistent failure after failure after failure,
Yeah.
right? But because we're seeing again, like they're seeing the them evolve, is looking at devs actually paying attention to the mistakes that the others are making. You're starting to see the features that are required to have the genre exist bare minimum be present.
Hmm.
Whether or not they're gonna be good and good enough to survive is another story, right? That depends on the market itself because we haven't really had a really solid entry in, like, the middle ground of the genre to be able to say, "This is 100% the next big thing," right? So I can't say that. But right now, I feel like the genre is going through the same thing that previous, genres did in their birth. So we're talking about your MMOs, your MOBAs, your battle royales. So there's the initial pioneer game that like shows up, establishes itself, and everybody sees, oh, they're making money. We want a piece of that. And so then there's the chaos. There's the everyone jumping in, the jumping in to try to make their own version of it, right? And so um, over time, those will change, and then eventually there'll be less than a handful of really stable, rock solid big ones. That at that point, if you're coming into the game, into that scene, half cocked, you're gonna die on arrival. And so you have to have something truly special in order to make a dent in that. And so I feel like extraction shooters are in the chaos phase, right? And so you have your pioneers, which is Escape from Tarkov. I know technically the Division in its Dark Zone did it first, but they didn't make the genre like Tarkov did, right? Um, and so all respect to them in that regard. And so you have the pioneer, now you have the chaos phase. Hunt kind of found its own niche, right? So I think the real question is not necessarily like I think there is. I think there really is opportunity for a really good game to do well. The question becomes, what does the middle look like? Because is there room enough for multiple niches in that regard? So you have the two big ones right now that I see that have the most information on is Arc Raiders and Exoborn.
Yeah.
Fairly close to each other. In a lot of factors, they're different. They're different enough to where I feel like they wouldn't necessarily step on each other's toes. That's only if the market's big enough to support both of them, right? With Marathon, there's a lot less information out there. And I know maybe that's kind of may make some people a little nervous. You should see the Arc Raiders subreddit. People are just constantly speculating: is the game canceled? Is this, that, and the other? Because you know what? Sometimes
Yeah.
companies are really good with OPSEC. They're really good at keeping their mouth shut, right? Not having leaks, right? And if the Cycle Frontier is a great example, is that you have to stick the landing, right?
Mhm.
Because if you have a ton of eyes on a failed launch, your game's dead on arrival. Doesn't matter how good it is, right? So sometimes silence is better.
Yeah. Yeah, especially, as dev timelines change and the whole industry has seen a lot of, layoffs and craziness going on over the past few years. Yeah, it seems like there is kind of a benefit to a little bit of, okay, we got some of our own stuff going on. You talk with such I feel like your knowledge base on the games industry seems so thorough. I may have heard this in a video, but I might be misunderstanding. Did you ever work in the games industry or adjacent to it or something? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't want to think because I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I worked for two different game companies. Uh, one of which was Wargaming. I did help a lot with when World of Warships was coming into beta and, kind of help building their community customer service in that regard before they started outsourcing. And so some of the stuff that they had access to in terms of data, it hasn't really changed, right? It really does. It hasn't. And so a great example, I think, was the average gamer sticks with a game about 6 months. That's has it changed in the last 10 years? Maybe, maybe not. But like that's, I mean, if you look at your own experience, that sounds about right, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. say, unless it's some game that you're maining or, one of these kind of live service experiences that get huge DLCs or something. Yeah, I think that's a
Mhm.
pretty
Or
fair
even then, you leave them, you'll come back, you'll leave them,
take
you'll
of that.
come back, you'll buy something
Exactly.
different. Like, it's
Yeah.
just there's that, and also, like, that game had a very big or the tanks at the very least had a very big, emphasis on clans, and clear data shows again, I'm not shocking anybody by saying this, it's like, people play more often for longer periods of time, over time, longer when friends play the game.
Yeah.
Shocker, right? It's like but if you think about it, like, this is obvious stuff, but yet you see features like guilds and clans going away. They haven't really been a thing in a very long time, except for in specific type of genres like MMOs, things like that. Like, these tools has slowly stopped being included into games, and I think that's the detriment to the games themselves.
Yeah. Well, especially like you're saying, just building those kind of consistent communities. I mean, and like growing up, kind of my foray into that would have been like guilds in World of Warcraft, which were kind of like we said one of the biggest, kind of things bringing you back to it. Kind of the stuff that the player created, engagement systems that are kind of built
Sure.
into it.
And I think that's the future of the genre personally. Like, that's my thing is that that's like my little dark horse prediction, or, of the genre, because I think right now you have, wipes as a solution to some of the biggest problems the genre has, which is gear inflation. I think it's a faulty solution because, like we talked about, you're already getting a player who's already hesitant about the kind of game they're getting into, right? And then you're telling them, okay, let's say you get in at the ideal time at the beginning of a wipe. And for those who don't know, I'll explain what the wipe means here in a second. And you're told, hey, guess what? All your progress is going to go away in an X amount of time. That's a non-starter, right? And so, for those uninitiated, I'll explain a little bit. Is that over time people will get rich, to the point where the risk is gone, and it becomes so ubiquitous that it's basically neither here nor there about what gear you have. And so companies in the past have used the crutch. Now, we'll down this hill. It's an absolute crutch, um, of just wiping everybody, and they'll call it a seasonal wipe. They'll dress it up however they want, but it's an absolute. People will defend it left and right. I think that's Stockholm syndrome. It's an absolute crutch, right? Because you're asking people to start playing during a certain time for their peak enjoyment, right? So, like, every 3 months or even less, you get to enjoy your game at its absolute best. Outside of that, nah, you don't get to play the game when it was the way it
Mm.
was designed to be played.
Yeah. See, I was gonna ask you. I was like, do you think that the wipe is something that's necessary? It feels like there's at least conversation in a lot of these games, either upcoming or about having that kind of system in there. But it seems like something, from my understanding, before coming in and playing more of the games, that it was very exclusive to Tarkov. But do you feel like that's tied to the genre itself, or is that just like you're saying, a crutch that certain developers are kind of relying on as opposed to balancing the game in a better way?
I think I think because of Tarkov's influence in the genre, you're gonna have a lot of features, in that devs think are required in their games that
Mm.
aren't, that it just simply are not, right? So here's a great example. I We have not discussed at all the games that you have played prior to this, correct?
No.
Okay. So I imagine you've played, well, other than what you've mentioned
Yeah.
here, I imagine you've played some level of PvP shooter of some kind, right? And how important is it, or how ubiquitous is the feature of knowing who's on your team and who's not?
Yeah. A bit. Yeah.
Pretty standard, right? Almost to the point where it's just you take it for granted, right? It's like, even in any given game, you know who your teammates are, you know who your enemies are, right?
Yeah.
How important is it, or how often do you see it as a feature, the ability to communicate with your team outside of just using a mic? Like, I don't know, a ping system. You go, hey, there's a person there, or hey, we should move over here. Pretty standard quality of life feature nowadays, right?
For
Right.
sure.
So Tarkov has none of that,
Yeah. Yep.
right? In a game where you lose things and you can instantly die.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
So think about that.
I've definitely
I'm
almost
just
put some rounds in my friend's back in Tarkov.
Right. So think about it. I'm trying to attract the average player. Again, gonna lose progress, possibly lose progress at the end of the night. And imagine their response when they accidentally kill me, or I accidentally kill them, and they just lose all their stuff.
Yeah.
right? That's non-negotiable. That's a non-starter, right? It's and I understand in their circumstance, being a realistic military shooter, there's a reason for that. I can still I can still debate against that, mind you, but that's not here. That's not for right now. But like now, imagine in a sci-fi universe, there's perfectly logical reasons to justify a friend or foe system, a ping, navigational system and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
But the influence of Tarkov players came to the cycle and said, "Yeah, you know what? You can't have the ping. You just that's not good." And you know how you can see your friendlies through terrain, which was admittedly a little strong at the time based on how hard they did it.
Hmm.
We don't do that anymore. In fact, there are plenty of people who didn't want a friend or foe, period, let alone any, right? These influences kept trying to push in this. So I think no matter what, you're going to have games that are going to have that Tarkov influence. And I think it's devs' best interest to ignore that.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, this works in your little corner of the genre, a little corner of space, but literally nowhere else does that work. Now come wipes, right? Wipes, they instituted essentially over 8 years ago as a way of, well, we need to find a way to get around this. We'll figure it out. 8 years later, you telling me they hadn't figured it out, right? I don't think they want to, right? I Skills are the future for this. I think honestly, what ends up happening, the top 1%, top 10% of the player base will like get super high progress, super fast progress, get all their gear, and then they drop into the game and they just they don't have anything else to do anymore. And so they start pushing gunshots. They start looking for fights. They start basically becoming murder hobos, right? They're looking
Yep.
for they're looking for any possible outlet they can to have PvP, right? That's a great thing. You have dedicated players that are so passionate about your game that they basically just run through all your content like so fast. But everybody else is still doing it. But now they have the added pressure of these guys who have no motivation other than just to kill you on the map. Right? There has to be a solution to that. And I think the solution to that is the same thing as the solution to not having wipes, is that you need to put them in an arena together,
Hmm.
right? Have guilds, have clans, right? And so what you can do is you create an escalation, so to speak, of conflict. So you can even increase the group size. Hey, bring more of your boys. Make a more dangerous map. Hell, upscale it. Put vehicles in or something, right? Like upscale it to the point where you're increasing the amount of gear you're going to lose and the type of gear you're bringing into the play,
Hmm.
and then also create an incentive for these individuals to reach out and grab and connect with everybody else as well. A great example that I saw when I was playing Warhammer Online. Are you familiar?
No, Warhammer. I'm not familiar.
Very, very, very old game. The Warhammer Online. The Warhammer tried their spin on an MMO,
Hmm.
and their clan system was interesting in this that your clan would level up based on the people who were leveling up. So you had a directed set to grab new players, right? Because they were doing the most leveling, right? And so you create a system rather than the individual coming in and being bombarded by, this harsh environment of this extraction shooter. You have individuals who know their stuff and go, hey, let's take you under our wing. We're going to help you out. You have an incentive to bring you along, not just on the hard stuff, but like in general to help your progress, to help teach you how to play this game.
Yeah.
I think it helps player retention. I think it helps matchmaking. And if you do it right, because you can wipe clans at that point. That's a different thing entirely because you're not wiping the character, you're wiping the clans, right? You're having seasonal competitions, you're having events. At that point, people are readily dedicated, they're readily involved, they're sufficiently invested at that point that having a seasonal wipe on just the clan stuff, I think it's perfectly acceptable,
Yeah.
alternative.
No, that's a really cool idea. I mean, both those concepts, the idea of like these kind of more engaging, kind of hardcore in-game experiences for players kind of, been in and, want to see what kind of the maximum tense areas are. And then, yeah, also, uh, I feel like a lot of games could benefit from what you're talking about, kind of encouraging, maybe in Destiny, they call like Sherpaing, I believe in Tarkov, they refer to
Mhm.
it, but encouraging those kind of experiences where you're, integrating your highest level players with your medium and lower level players and creating reward systems on both ends for that is, yeah, absolutely. Every extraction game I've played, I feel like could benefit from that for sure.
Absolutely, and I think can you imagine, like, instead of having a three-man, which is the industry standard these days, which I cannot for the life of me understand why they went from 4 to 3, but whatever. Um, I'm sure there's a metric out there that they studied for that reason. Um, but, like, cool, instead of having 3, you can bring up to 5 now. right? Like,
No.
oh man, does the chaos get real big at that point, right? But the map, they have a specialty map. It's much larger. Okay,
Mhm.
well, it's super large. How are you gonna way around? How are you gonna get around? With vehicles that you also can lose, that you also have to build, that you also have to try to loot parts for and all that kind of jazz. So you have to maintain a garage. Like, can you just imagine like the level of organization you create? That's players interacting with one another, right? These are people who are like, they have a reason to do it and they engage with each other and they want to. Like, these players, they want to do that. If you look at any content creator, what they are doing, all they're doing is dropping down and then looking for gunfights. That's all they're doing,
Mhm.
right? And so like they want to fight each other. Give them an excuse to, give them the resources to, and they'll absolutely do your work for you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. With kind of obviously, I feel like you probably hit on a lot of the questions I had about Marathon in the context of the genre,
Mhm.
um, just through talking about all of these, all these other things that we've talked about. But I guess, where do you stand on Marathon? What do you know about it? Have you just seen the trailer? What's kind of your take? Because I guess from my perspective, I'm looking at Marathon as like, okay, maybe this is the first. Well, maybe not the first, because I guess Epic might have something going on, but a AAA company approaching this genre as like a primary focus for an entire game. Does that excite you as opposed to what you see, or do you think? Well, I guess we have Call of Duty maybe, but obviously that was kind of maybe
It was
mode,
though.
not like it's not like they made a whole Call of Duty game where it's like this is an extraction only Call
For
of Duty
sure,
game.
for sure.
Um,
I think because of the DMZ situation, like DMZ and Hezone made the same cardinal mistake. They removed the threat, they removed the risk board, and so it's basically a non-starter, right? So like I said before, a mountain of money and a readily accessible player base to start off with didn't change the fact that the game didn't
yeah,
move well enough and then they continue to support it. So it's like, it's uh, uh, the thing about it is that studios don't make games, people make games, right? And so it comes down to like, well, who is working at that studio now that inspires confidence, not just the name, right? And so in my case for Arc Raiders is that a lot of the original artistic directors and project managers from the OG Battlefields are in
mhm,
that are in Embark right now. So that's inspires some confidence.
yeah,
Um, and so with a big, a big name, the big concern you have to worry about when it comes to bigger projects is that bloat is a real thing in terms of like how much money they're spending getting this thing off the ground, which means that much more they have to succeed that much more just to break even,
yeah,
right? That's the biggest hurdle they have to go over, right? Bungie, the pedigree on the name alone, I think is going to buy them a lot of forgiveness and a lot of hype, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think that's going to be to their benefit, and I hope they really leverage that really, really well. I know Marathon is one of their earliest IPs. I don't know much about the IP at all. And so I'm kind of excited to see what they're gonna do with it because I only hear again, I hear a reverence for it every time I hear someone talk about it. So it kinda draws me in. I'm like, wow, what was the thing that really kinda pulled you in for that? And I wanna know how they're gonna do that. And based off of the dev interviews that I'm able to see, they wanna create a lot of story-driven content and movement in the game right now. Again, you can wish in one hand, shit in the other, and figure out which one's gonna fill up both. So it's something I was like, fill up first. So it's kinda like, I'll s I'll engage with it when I see it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Um, I know it's gonna be an extraction shooter. I've heard some rumors, and I'm not sure if it's entirely accurate that it's gonna have some hero characters. I'm not sure if you know more about that than I do in terms of whether or not how accurate that actually is.
Yeah,
Um
it does seem like, so there was like a shift in leadership where the game director who was there left under like some not good circumstances, and then the guy who came in, Joe Ziegler, he was the game director for Valorant prior. So when that happened, there was like an IG article speculating on it, and then towards the end of last year in October, they came out and they kind of deliver like, "Hey, we're still working on it. We're gonna have stuff in early 2025." Just like I wouldn't even say like a Vidoc type thing, but
We're still alive.
yeah, just, "Hey, we're here."
We're
Everything's
still alive.
exactly, and there you could tell they were very specific to not kind of. They could tell like the hero shooter stuff was kind of a hot button issue after Concord, but it does
Right.
seem like they're calling them runners, so they're very specific about that. But it does seem like potentially they're leaning in that direction. I can't say like Delta Force exactly because I don't know enough about how the systems work, but runners as like these classes/characters. We don't know exactly, but
Well,
that
I
might
mean,
be the
we used to
direction.
we used to call they used to call characters in the Cycle Frontier prospectors, and so but that had no bearing on their classes or characters and like that. So that's not necessarily even a given either. Um, I'm mostly just concerned because I've recently made a video regarding hero characters and how they affect the genre, and I don't think it's a positive one. I think uh, Exoborn does it sort of well in the sense that they create classes with their exosuits.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I think they don't fit well is because the genre is built around risk and scarcity. So if you have aspects of your character that never get lost and never run out, that kind of undercuts that.
Hmm.
And so when you do it, you have to do it in a way that maybe doesn't even resemble the original hero shooter moniker that it's, being delivered under. And so I think Exoborn does something well in the sense that you have your exosuits, and based on which exosuit you have, depending on what kind of abilities that you have, and there are certain abilities that you can latch on, and they themselves are not infinite. You have to,
Yeah.
they replenish, they use themselves up, in terms of like rockets, like you can't just fire infinite rockets, not on cooldown. You have a certain number of them. And they are lost on death. Right. And that's the key aspect. They are lost on death. Right. And so I feel like that's a good way of kind of creating classes, so to speak, which is just a broader hero shooter. So I've kind of delved on this as well, as a sense that a hero shooter is just a specific class shooter. Right. You look at Battlefield and they have their medic, their sniper, all that stuff. You're just getting more specific with it. Team Fortress 2, I think, is a good example of like a middle ground. You have enough to still call them classes. You also have enough to call them heroes. And so like once you start getting more than that, it's a straight up hero shooter. When you get less than that, it's a class shooter.
So you don't want the classes or the heroes to interfere with the tension. You have to have that risk there. You can't be a crutch.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think Delta Force kind of fumbled that, I think, a little bit. And so again, because like when you're loading up, you're like, okay, I want to have X number of smoke grenades. You start gaining a certain game sense where you're okay, well, I'm gonna need this much ammo, I'm gonna need this much armor, I'm gonna need this much medical supplies, I'm gonna need this much grenades or smoke grenades or whatever, right? Utility, whatever, right? You start having that kind of game sense. That's an expression of your skill, right? Of just of the game knowledge, right? And so when you take away a portion of that, like when your character comes with free heals, free smoke grenades, and they never run out, it kind of it removes that skill expression from you. And again, it takes away the tension as well. And so that's just a portion of your kit you don't have to worry about losing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm concerned with that. But again, doesn't necessarily mean it can be done the wrong way, or it can be done in a way that I haven't thought of yet. Some kind of innovative way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think because they've been so silent, like I talked about before, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Right. And so from an industry point of view, like when you're dealing with like launch dates, so you're looking at like maybe 6 months to 4 months of like planning. Like, okay, well, you have to get the contracts in for all the advertisements. You have to get the contracts in for like the streamers and their own advertising, all that stuff, right? You have to get the Steam and on board and all that other stuff. You have to get the servers ready. Like you're looking at all these planning that has the time, right? And again, because you're marketing, which means everybody's knowing about it, which means everyone's eyes are on you, right? I want to point out, Apex dropped out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Because they just announced them were live,
Nowhere.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, out of nowhere. And at that point, all you had to do was log on and judge for yourself. That's it. You had no other presuppositions. You had nobody else telling you what to think. You had no marketing to set expectations that couldn't be met, right? You just showed up and you played the game. Was it fun? And you decided from there, right? So again, silence isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I know you want to know more. You want to know everything, right? But then there's the opposite.
Yeah.
Then there's the opposite, right? Gray Zone Warfare is a great example of the exact opposite, right? It's a meme at this point where like, well, they'll announce, oh, we have an announcement on this date. All right, well, show up for the date like a month later. All right. It's a trailer for their next announcement date for this feature or whatever it is. So it's not even anything feature. They're just announcing that they're going to announce something a month later. And then when they get there, it's basically the same shit that you knew before. It's like the exact opposite. It's just a bunch of white noise. After a while, you just turn it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And so I know the silence is really, really like, just play something else. I don't know. Sand comes out in April.
Okay.
April. Dune Awakening comes out.
Yeah.
I mean, you got stuff coming up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
I'm really excited for Dune Awakening personally, but yeah, it's
Nice. Are you like pretty into the Dune series, or are you just excited about the game?
not at all.
Okay,
Not at
gotcha.
all, right? It's again, it's just like Marathon is like I watched the movies,
Mm,
right? I thought it was really intriguing. I thought the sci-fi setting was really intriguing because, having worked for a Games Workshop at one point, so Warhammer is very something I'm very familiar with. It always bugged me that people had swords, right, in a sci-fi setting, right? So and especially like, someone who studied a lot of military history
mm,
and a vet, and so it's kinda like, make it make sense. Like, you develop these technologies that you can shoot people and blow their brains out and do all this kinda stuff, and yet you still have swords.
yeah,
I felt like the Dune does this great balance where it's just like, you have all the reasons to have melee combat because, well, everyone has shields.
yeah,
Duh, you develop shields because why? Guns hurt. And so, like, you have a reason to have, melee combat, but then you're on Arrakis where worms are attracted to shields. So you have this, like, trifecta of, like, when you use it, when you don't use it, when it's available, when it's not available. It's just while all looking really cool and space sci-fi and whatnot. So it's kinda like I've always kind of been, like, Dune curious, so to speak. And so the way it's setting up the game that right now with, like, the PvP and that aspect, I'm like, I'm kind of, "All right, let's give this a shot."
yeah. Yeah, I've definitely been, ever since I think last Summer Games Fest or something, I think was when I first saw it, and just kind of that combination of this, MMO, and now they're talking about, I saw one of their trails they had, the desert's gonna be changing so you can build stuff and they'll get wiped out by a
Mm,
worm, and the survival mechanics of that, yeah, I think that's gonna be really interesting to see on that level. I don't know if there's anything that's tried to do it exactly how they're doing it really, so that's cool.
right, which is not all that dissimilar from the idea I gave about guilds. It's like, cool, this
Mhm.
is just the PvP zone you
Yeah.
have every week. Well, the PvP people are still keep coming back anyways, but it's not affecting anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, and if you're interested in another extraction a game as Sand, it's
Mm.
coming out, I believe, April 9th, I believe. Uh, uh, are you familiar with the title?
I saw the video on your channel where the combat on top of these kinda crawling
Yeah.
things across the desert, it looked cool. It looked very cool. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard
Yeah,
anything about it
optimization.
though.
Yeah, optimization-wise, they have a lot to go to do, so I'm hoping that they when they announced early access is because they found out it was, like, a server issue and they can solve it.
Okay.
So I'm really kinda hesitant about that. But I feel like that's a great example. If someone needed an example, what changes from a game that has some risk to an extraction game that's done well, is if you put Sea of Thieves and Sand right next to each other, right? Because visually, you're like, well, they're very similar, right? But the key difference is that in Sand, you lose your mech when it dies, right? And everything on it,
Yeah.
and everything on it, right? And in Sea of Thieves, your boat respawns.
Yeah. Eh,
So, I think that's the difference, really. I think, there's more to it than that, but, like, essentially, that's a great juxtaposition of what the difference is.
yeah. Well, dude, thank you so much for all of your insight. At the end of all of these, the question that I ask is, top 3 favorite games of all time, and I am curious after hearing, I mean, your analytical mind on the extraction genre, is your kinda top 3 space Phil, is Cycle up there? What are your top 3 games?
I think this question comes down to a person's age and the time in their life when these games come out, right? That's an emotional answer. That's not an analytical answer. That's an emotional answer, right? For me, it would have to be, Halo, the original Halo, and partially Halo 2 because that was like the birth of online gaming at that point. It was no longer a matter of who was the best person on the block. It was now who was the best person around ever.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
changes the game completely, right? I think it was a lot of great moments, the story, like just the time in your person's life when this is happening. It's getting teenagers. It's like so there's a lot of nostalgia is built into that.
Yeah.
The Mech Warrior series,
Okay.
specifically Mech Warrior 4. Um, that it's that's my favorite IP when it comes to, anything in general, in terms of it's basically Game of Thrones with giant robots. What's not to like?
Absolutely.
Um, it really pushed me in terms of the online gaming. I managed a ton of clans when it comes to MechWarrior. I saw how valuable clans were in that space, all the way up until MechWarrior Online, where I had to kinda stop because it became more of like a job than anything else. You know how that goes. Um, and then I would say Legacy of Kain. That series was
Okay,
a
nice.
a fantastic, like, the story driven, over several different consoles. I even played the PvP, like, beta that they had did the
That's cool.
iteration, right? I don't know. I'm not sure what prompted them to go in that direction because there was no reason for it. But it was still fun nonetheless.
Were you pretty
Yep.
hyped on the reboot remakes, I guess, that just came out? Have you played those?
I mean, I have my memories. Sometimes
Yeah.
the best thing is to let things go, to let be in your memory, right? And so it's one of those things where like, do I really want to watch the Halo TV series?
Yeah, right.
Given that they're likely have butchered it.
What have they
And
done? They
so
butchered my boy. No, Chief.
right.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes that's better to leave things in the past. Sometimes it's better to leave things there when they were good and then to have them tarnish it. I mean, for example would be Lord of the Rings, of the opposite effect. When I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, I not at all, right? I don't care for the movies at all. But when they first came out, I loved the fact that everybody who was a big fan of them was really happy with the results. I
Yeah.
love that for them because and I thought thinking to myself, do I want a MechWarrior movie so bad that I'd want them to butcher it? Like, you know what? Just leave it deep. Leave it be. Just
Yeah,
leave it
right.
be.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's one of those things where it's the same game, and I'd rather be it better than it actually is in my mind than replay it and kind of like, yeah, it was kind of mid. Like maybe it wasn't, but like I don't want to go back and realize, it was kind of mid.
Yeah. Yeah, that is always the worst feeling, especially like a show or movie that you're telling someone like, "No, you gotta see this." And then you go back, you're like,
Right.
"Well, for the time, you had to be there," kinda.
For the time, like TV shows, The Expanse, for example,
Yeah.
one of my
Yeah,
favorite
that's a
TV
good
show.
choice.
Right? I go back and I'll watch the first season. That's a hard watch. Right? I love that series to death, but the first season is a hard watch. It's a really slow grind that's like, ugh. Ah, when I recommend it to someone, like, "Hey, if you're not willing to go through the first season, don't start it at all," because it's like, that's not a great watch.
Yeah. Well, dude, man, thank you again so much for doing this, and then, obviously, everyone, check out The Gecko Frontier is your YouTube channel. Is there anywhere else where people can find your stuff or anything else you
I
would
mean,
like to point towards?
I got an X account, I guess, I used to kinda just poke devs once in a while to be like, "Hey, give me access to this thing, you got it."
Yeah.
I use it once in a while, maybe I'll use it more once another game kicks up. Right now, I'm doing a lot of videos when it comes to just, like, ideas and musings of, like, and also news of, like, extraction shooters. And so I plan to pick it up a lot more once a game does come out because 'cause I'm more at home making guides and being entertaining doing that, like,
Yeah.
making gags, making memes, things like that, gameplay. I'm more at home doing that, and when there's a game that gets my attention, you'll probably see a lot more out of me. In the meantime, I'm gonna stay dabbling into these games. Who knows? I might do a lot more into Dune Awakening once that comes out. Um, but yeah, I just stay tuned, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the time and your audience's attention.
Yeah, dude. Absolutely. And like he was just saying, all of the links to his stuff will be in the description or pinned comment, wherever's best. And thank you guys.